Hey, welcome everybody. We have another debate today. That's 2 for 1 today. This one's going to be on a completely different type of subject matter from the Dragnot G-Man debate that was on Mac Revolution. This is going to be on more of a theological tone. This is going to be topic is going to be: does the Abrahamic God exist as anything other than an object in the mind? And it's going to be moderated by Nikola H, aka the Doctor. And I'm going to be kind of paying attention, but I do have things I need to take care of, so I'm turning it over to them. They're going to have the debate. They have it already structured out, and then might open it up afterwards. If he needs to get a hold of me, he knows how to do that. But I will watch it afterwards at some point, so I will pay attention at some point. So, anyways, go ahead and take it over. You have all the mods you need, and I will listen as I can. The Doctor, are you there?
Yeah, I thought. So the format of the debate will be going with 8-minute openings, followed by 8-minute rebuttals to the openings of the individuals, followed by supplementary secondary rebuttals, which will be 5 minutes, 4-minute conclusions, and then a 5-minute free-form cross-examination questioning. And Owchywawa, I believe you agreed to go first, so your 8 minutes starts whenever you're ready. Just give me a notification.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So we're talking today about whether or not the Abrahamic God exists, and I have 8 minutes to prove the existence of this God. So I'm going to go real fast. All right. So first, we need to find what God is. So you might remember this classic dark matter 2525 description of God. And some people might think of this as God, like some magic man in the sky with a beard or something like that. If that's what you mean by God, I also agree with you. This God does not exist. So my definition of God comes from the Abrahamic tradition. And as St. Thomas Aquinas said, the most proper definition of God can be found where he defined himself inside of the burning bush in the story of Moses. So in this story, he said, "I am he who is." What exactly does that mean? Well, according to the tradition of the Abrahamic tradition, it's been interpreted as the following. Finite beings are defined by their essence. God can be defined only by being, pure and simple, nothing less and nothing more. So basically, from the Abrahamic tradition, we get the definition of God as being the necessary being. So, and this is the most proper definition according to tradition. So can we prove that this God exists? Okay, so I have an argument here. The first premise is everything that is changing is being changed by something else. Second premise is that the series of changes and things changing cannot be infinitely long. Therefore, there must be a first cause of all change, which we call God. So I'm going to go through each of these premises. The first premise is again, everything that is changing is being changed by something else. This is ultimately founded upon this statement here. Whatever exists must have that in virtue of which it is distinguished from nothing, either in itself or from another. So let's go through this. This seems to be evidently true because there's no contrary possibility. So if something is not distinguished from nothing, for example, then it is nothing. And also, if something was distinguished from nothing by nothing, well, that just wouldn't make any sense because nothing is nothing. So how would it distinguish nothing from nothing? It doesn't make any sense. So that seems evidently true. What about this second part? So some people might say things are distinguished by something in itself, like in virtue of something within itself. Now, I'm ultimately going to argue that this is true for at least one thing, but for normal everyday things, this doesn't seem to be true. As according to Immanuel Kant said, existence is not a predicate or a determination of things. This proposition seems strange and absurd, but it is indubitably certain. Take any subject you please, for example, Julius Caesar, draw up a list of all of the predicates which may be thought to belong to him, not accepting even those of space and time. You will quickly see that he can either exist with all these determinations or not exist at all. And I don't agree with everything Kant says, but he has an interesting point here. And that is, we can define anything down to the very particular, down to the very details, right? We could define exactly what an alien is, for example, but knowing what an alien is different from knowing whether or not aliens exist. These are two different questions. So we see that there's a distinction between what a thing is and that a thing is. That is, in traditional terminology, essence and existence. So that just means that you can't determine from what a thing is that it exists. And if you could, that would mean that it would necessarily exist. Yeah. So this doesn't seem to be the case, at least for most things that we think of, like chairs and the universe and anything else that's finite. So it has to be from another for most things. The reason that which distinguishes something from nothing. So how does it relate to change? So change is ultimately the reduction of some potential to some actuality. And potential in and of itself, so for example, we have the potential for a building and then it becomes actual. But the potential for a building in and of itself is indeterminate with respect to being, right? So if you think about it, this is related to this essence and existence distinction, because essence in itself is only potential, whereas existence is actual, right? So ultimately, the idea is that you have to have something actual to make something potential. It has to be, again, dependent upon, it has to be something that distinguishes it from nothing. All right, so that's my defense of the first premise. The second premise is that the series cannot be infinitely long, right? So this is, again, based upon this distinction. It doesn't matter how many of these things you put over here, they don't have existence in and of itself. So it still needs to be distinguished from nothing by something, right? Okay, so even whenever it comes to bricks, for example, some people might say, okay, fine, the bricks are made actual by the bricks. Or sorry, the building's made actual by the bricks. But this doesn't really work for several reasons. For one reason, bricks in themselves, they change. So they have to be potential in some respect. In that respect, they are not determinate with respect to being. Also, the whole depends upon its parts for its existence and change. So in and of itself, the brick doesn't exist in what it is. It doesn't exist because it depends upon its parts for its existence. So you could say, okay, fine, we can actualize the bricks by the parts of the bricks, and that's what makes the bricks actual. But you're going to have the same problem with this as well, because all of the same objections apply to the parts of the bricks that apply to the whole of bricks. So again, we can do the parts again, and so on and so forth, and you see how this infinite series can build up. But it doesn't matter because, again, what a thing is in itself doesn't exist, not in of itself. It doesn't matter how many different things you add that don't have existence in and of itself. It still has to get its existence from another. I like the way that Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange put it. If the whole cosmic series constituted the necessary being, this would be the same as saying that 100,000 idiots constitute one intelligent man. And that's because, again, in and of itself, these things are not actual. They don't have that which would make it actual, right? And it doesn't matter how many things you add, because you got to get the existence from another. So ultimately, we have to start out with a first cause, right? And this first cause, if its existence is not its essence, if what it is not existence.
30 seconds.
Gotcha. Then it would have to get its existence from another and wouldn't be the first cause. So ultimately, you have to have a first being of which essence is existence. And so from change, we get this idea of a necessary being, a being that exists by definition, pretty much. And we get the same thing from the Abrahamic tradition. And so therefore, God exists.
Time. That was perfect. 8 minutes.
Yep.
All right. Deconverted man, go ahead.
All right. Deconverted man here. All right. Lobsters exist. Now to the thing. Does the Abrahamic God exist as anything other than an object in the mind? Clearly, the concept of gods that we've been exposed to exist in our mind, and gods we've never heard about and do not know can't exist in our mind because, well, we haven't heard about them. God concepts are delivered by and from humans. We can write down anything about a god and what it supposedly said and or did. We can get others to think that such things happen. We see that people can and do believe in all sorts of things without any evidence to do so. The cargo cults are a perfect example of how people can and do believe in and worship just about anything. We also know that people can make up fantastic stories, and we know that others can fall for such stories. Joseph Smith, for example, made up the idea of finding some golden plates. There's a whole new telling of Jesus' adventures in America. Oliver Cowdery and others went along with the idea. Church went through prosecution, and even the inventor was killed, yet people believed it anyways. No evidence for any of the things happening that the holy text claimed to have happened. And we can observe from outside that changes have been made to those holy texts because we have some of the older Bibles of the Mormon books around. But that doesn't matter to the believers. We consider now the Bible, and the way that the Old and New Testament was transmitted from person to person was oral. And when it finally did get penned in, there was a Jewish tradition that whenever an old version would get worn out, someone would copy it by hand and then burn the old one. Yep, burn the old one right on up. That practice, I think, might have been performed by early Christians as well. So anything that existed to show that there was major changes is gone. That's pretty convenient. We also have the issue of history not aligning with the Bible at all. We know from science there was not a single man and woman that started the human species, both from evolution and because of incestual breeding that would have bottlenecked us into oblivion long ago. Who was Cain's wife? It would have had to have been his sister. We know that the Egyptians used mostly paid labor for the construction of the pyramids, and there was not a vast amount of Jewish people portrayed in the Bible at that time. And in fact, no evidence of Jewish people being there at that time exists. The problems only grow from there for the Old Testament. But what about the new one? Well, without Adam and Eve, Jesus' whole lineage is thrown into question. And speaking of Jesus, let's just address the narrative of the crucifixion. There's a blackening of the sky. Well, that would have been a solar eclipse. Somebody should have reported that. There was a shaking of the ground, an earthquake that nobody said anything about. And then the fabric in the temples tore asunder, yet the Jews didn't record this event? Impossible. The whole New Testament reads as a narrative, not as history. We have the all-seeing narrator take us along the adventure of Jesus and his friends. Jesus one day goes out by himself, mind you, to the desert to be tempted by the trickster that later becomes the devil. Well, who the bleep was there to know that that was going on? Only an all-seeing narrator could make a story like that happen. It's made up, whole cloth. It's a work of mythology. But so what? So what if there's no evidence of God of any kind? So what if the Bible has nothing to support itself historically? Only a handful of locations and kings being confirmed. So what? God could still exist. Just because we made up God, that doesn't mean that God is just made up. That's the genetic fallacy, don't you know? Okay, so we don't have evidence or tests, but we have these arguments that happen to have logical fallacies in it. But trust us, you just don't understand how to understand the argument, and you just really want to sin, and you'll be sorry when you die anyways. I suppose it's rather dull just mentioning facts that there's no positive support of this God's existence, so I have to have some sort of argument, and in this case, I'm going to assume that there's a God of some sort, and show that why, even if there was one, it could not know anything at all. Here's that syllogism. Premise 1, to have knowledge, there needs to be a reality on which to base knowledge. Premise 2, in order to have knowledge of the universe, there must be a universe to know about. Premise 3, if there was an eternal being alone prior to the existence of the universe, it could only know itself. Conclusion, without the existence of a universe, such an eternal being would not have knowledge of the universe. Empirical evidence of a God would be nice. I'd like to be able to see this God. Repeated testing would be great. God of the Old Testament has a test where Baal worshippers really get pwned. Some Christians have told me that God doesn't change, yet we can't do that same to death today. Well, why not? Reasons. I guess that leaves us with a possible valid and sound argument for this God existing outside of the mind of humans, something I've never encountered. But even if we were presented with that, wouldn't be evidence, but we should follow the conclusion further if it was a logically coherent argument. And unless and until we have one, we should be skeptical of the conclusions. That's it.
Okay, Deconverted Man finished with 6 minutes. I guess that moves us right into the first set of rebuttals. Owchywawa, you have the floor.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. It'd be nice if he could put that syllogism like on the side chat, and I'll put mine over there as well after I'm done with this part. Okay, so hold on, let me share my screen here. Okay, so you guys can see this?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so he went over a lot of things, like the history and stuff, and I mean, I could go into that, but I think that it's doesn't really pertain to the topic. So, but he did bring up a few things. First of all, he's brought up logical fallacies. So I hope that he goes into the logical fallacies that I made, that he claims I made in the next part. And then he also talked about whether or not God has knowledge. So I will go into why God has knowledge here. So first we need to talk about what is knowledge. So, you know, we have the basic idea of how we get knowledge. We have light that reflects off an object and it enters into our eye. And then we determined, it's a glove, right? Okay, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, actually. If you look at the story, the man who mistook his wife for a hat, this is actually a clinical study or clinical story of a man who did not have the ability to abstract the forms or what a thing is, the essence of a thing. So he, for example, he took this glove, one of the examples, and he saw what it was. He could describe each of the particular things, like it's made of leather and stuff like that. But whenever he tried to say what it is, he said, a coin purse. It's a coin purse. So yeah, he didn't have the ability to abstract what a thing is from the particular accidental forms. And the reason for this, I would say, is because what a concept is in and of itself is it applies universally to all gloves. It's not a particular thing. It's shared by different things. It's ultimately immaterial because it's not particularized, right? And so in order to, there's something that happens in our brain, we don't know what it is, that can abstract from a universal principle from particular things. And that is what I call knowledge, the immaterial form of things, what it is. So something to point out is that any composite depends upon its parts for its existence. And as I mentioned, God, he can't be in any way composite because he must be the foundation of the change in things. He would be in some way potential. He wouldn't be the first cause that's purely actual. So, and also we need to consider that whatever is in the effect must pre-exist in the cause, right? So as Edward Feser said, if there were some aspect of an effect that didn't come from its total cause, then that would involve a potency that was actualized without anything doing the actualizing, which would violate the principle of causality. So because God is immaterial, everything that exists must pre-exist in God in an immaterial way. And this is what I would call knowledge. right? So ultimately, I would say that God does have knowledge because he has the forms of everything that exists in a material way. In fact, that would make him omniscient since he's purely actual. And it exists in him in a simple way with all the perfections. Yeah. So, and then he also said that one other thing he said that I want to address is he said that even if we could prove God through a logical argument, that wouldn't show that there's evidence. I'm not sure what he means by evidence then, and I'd like him to clarify that if he gets a chance. And I will yield my time at that point.
Okay, we'll move over to Deconverted Man's rebuttal of Owchywawa's opening. Tell me when you're ready to start.
I'm gonna go. Okay, so we have in essence the argument from motion, and there's a couple of things going on with this argument. It relies on, to some extent, deductive reasoning, and the idea of things needing causes or change, however you want to put it, only works in the universe up to a point into the past, because physics as we understand them just breaks down. So we cease to be able to talk coherently about what's going on in the universe at somewhere around t.00, whatever the bleep it is, time. And we have no idea what that universe is like, so we don't know what it could or couldn't do. So that's one problem. As far as God moving anything, well, there's no space, so I'm not sure how God could move. And if there's a prior, well, there can't be a prior because time doesn't exist either. But both of those things are completely ignored by God because it's God, I guess. So before God thinks X, is there a thought that precedes that? Well, then there can't be, because then that would be an infinite regress. But then God can't also be infinite because there can't be an infinite regress, so he's just eternal, which is different than infinity somehow. Okay, so God is not a magic man in the sky. That's nice. The definition of God is from an appeal to tradition, so I dismiss it as such. It's also an appeal to scripture, dismissed as such. It's a necessary being, which is nothing more than a tautology. You just can't define something into existence. The tautology of Deconverted Man is I'm a millionaire, therefore I'm a millionaire. Doesn't work like that. And premise one should be as far as we have observed. We can't talk about things we haven't observed, what we have not observed yet. The second premise is unproven, and again has problems with God being infinite, or possible problems of there. If God can't change and then changes the universe or makes a universe, what is God changing to do that? I thought God couldn't change, or maybe God can change. But how does that work? And if God is changing, then it violates the entire argument. So God can't change, but he has to change what's outside of God. But there's nothing outside of God because God's all that exists. So how does any of that work? I think that covers pretty much all of that. Yeah. So we've got the fallacies, at least one of them, and all I need is one, is that we have an appeal to tradition, appeal to scripture, and because of that, I'm skeptical of the rest of everything else. But there's other additional fallacies. So that's all I got.
All right, so you're conceding the remainder of your time because you got like 5 minutes left.
Yeah, we'll save it for the Q&A or what have you.
Okay. So now we'll be moving on to the rebuttals of the rebuttals, where you each try to make the best defense in light of the objections that your opponents have raised. Owchywawa, you begin.
Okay, I wasn't unmuted. Okay, hold on a second. All right, so he wanted to know. Okay, so first of all, he said physics, right? The problem is that Physics can't ultimately debunk what we're talking about here because, if I can find it, it's founded upon this, which is completely valid, and no matter what universe you come from, because it's founded upon the principle of identity and the principle of non-contradiction. Because you're going to contradict yourself if you're going to say that God is not distinguished from nothing, because if it's not distinguished from nothing, then it is nothing. So the foundation of this argument will apply to everything that exists, because it's a law of being. Anything that exists is going to have that which distinguishes it from nothing. So yeah, I don't think that the physics argument applies here. There's one more slide thing that I want to pull up here. So he asked, how does God make things, right? So, oh, one thing I do before this. He said that it appeals to tradition, right? So I wasn't appealing to tradition to show that God exists. I was appealing to tradition to define God, right? Because we're talking about the Abrahamic God, so I have to define what I mean by God and what the traditional Abrahamic definition of God is. I'm not saying that Moses actually existed or anything like that. That's not even necessary for my argument. So yeah. All right, so how does God make things exist? So like I said, there's this distinction between essence and existence. So ultimately, the way this works, so basically God adds existence to the essence. That's by being the existence. That's the basic idea. So here's some basic points I brought up. Being in and of itself is infinite in forms of actuality. Okay, that's because it ultimately applies to everything that could possibly exist. It's a ground for possibility. The essence of finite things is the finite degree to which things participate in being. So God isn't really changing things. He's just making them exist. He's making them actual. Things participate in being, which gives them the ground for their existence. Essence and existence are distinct because things participate in being in a finite way. So they are actual in a sense when they exist, but only because they participate in being in a finite way. That's what distinguishes them. And I think I got one more thing here, if it'll load. Okay, in God, all of the infinite possible forms of actuality exist materially, as I said, as knowledge. All right, so if we think about it, the way that it works in the Abrahamic tradition, right, we have let there be and then light, where light is ultimately the essence. It's what the thing is, and let there be, which is the essence, the existence of the thing. So you can think of this in terms of being as conceived and being as conceiver. And whenever it's finite things, it's a finite thing that's conceived. And God knows these things through knowing himself, since they pre-exist inside of God. He said that, well, you'd have to know that they exist before they exist. Oh, that's not really true. God knows that they exist because he's creating them. He knows them at the time that he's creating them because his knowledge is actually the cause of their existing, right? And another thing, being as known completely, as wholly known, as conceived, has traditionally been known as the Son, the Word, Jesus Christ, and willing, and God necessarily wills Jesus Christ, his Son, because he sees it as good. So that's known as the Holy Spirit. So in creating things, this is how it works. In creating things, God wills things.
30 seconds.
Sure. God wills things only in willing himself as the end. And in the being as conceived and being as conceiver, you get the unity of essence and existence. And you get something that exists. And I guess I'll stop there.
All right. Deconverted man, you have 5 minutes to respond to his objections to your points.
Okay, that was the points that I made regarding the syllogism I gave, in essence. And God knows things because it just knows things in a different way than we do. And it just requires an entire whole separate category of ways of knowing things. So special pleading 101 is what I would call that. So it just knows these things in a whole different way because it's God, and that's just how it works. Trust me on this. As far as brains and how we conceive of things, brains are complex and they can misunderstand reality. That's why we should be skeptical. And that's a problem that I guess God built into the system. Well, that's great. But yeah, that's all we have is the idea that God could know stuff is because it knows these things because it's God. And that's a circular argumentation. It's a tautology. It's an unproven assertion. There's nothing in it. It's just a void idea. Anyone can say that about anything. I can define myself as a millionaire and argue myself into being a millionaire. It doesn't work like that. My opponent asked to clarify, I believe, what I meant by if we had a coherent argument, that we wouldn't have evidence. Well, arguments are not evidence of anything. They are not proof of things. Arguments, even when valid and sound, just mean we should look at the conclusion further. See, there's a thing called the fallacy, which states that if you say that, well, because the argument sucked, that the conclusion's false. Well, no, that's not necessarily true. The conclusion might be true, but we don't know and we can't know. That's the whole exercise of logic, is to say, well, because you screwed up your argument, we're going to be skeptical of the conclusion. Yeah, my light is off, but the premises of there being lobsters had nothing to do with the conclusion. Whether lobsters exist or they don't, if they do, then my light's off. Well, okay, my light's off, but that didn't follow. So the argument sucks, and therefore we're skeptical of the conclusion. But the reverse could be true, that the conclusion to a logic and sound argument might be valid within logic, but it might turn out to be false in reality. I've never seen that argument, by the way. I don't know if it can exist, but because I'm skeptical, I say, well, that means if we were presented a logically sound argument for anything, be it God or anything else, that doesn't mean that that is automatically true. We should investigate to see if it's really true. And if logic is sound, it should be true. It should work out. So far it has. Who knows if somebody clever will come along and destroy all that. But so that's what I meant by that arguments are not evidence in and of themselves, even when they are valid and sound. That's not how they work. That's not how they function. I think I covered all the things from his rebuttal there. So that's all I've got.
Okay, so that takes us into the conclusions for the arguments. And Owchywawa, you go first.
Okay. Well, so no slides for this one. I just want to say that I don't think that I'm still not really clear on why he doesn't think it's evidence. Typically, in philosophy, we do say that if the premises are true and the argument is valid, then the argument's sound, then that means that the conclusion follows, at least when it's deductively true anyway. So yeah, I think that I've provided satisfactory proof for the existence of God. I don't think he didn't address at all, and I probably bring this up in the cross-examination, he didn't address at all what it is that distinguishes something from nothing. So I hope that we can get into that. But yeah, I'll conclude there.
All right. So I'll wait for the mod to switch us.
All right, so that was your conclusion?
Yes.
Okay, so you can go whenever you're ready, Deconverted Man.
Yeah, I was just going to ignore the rules and go anyways. Sorry. My bad. Well, my conclusion, and in reference to my saying that there was an appeal to tradition of what God is. Well, without a definition of God, then what is God? We don't know. And that's kind of my point, is anybody can say that God is anything. And anybody can make that up. And people have made that up. And all we hear about God is from people who can make up stories. So just saying, well, God is this because I said God is this doesn't make God that. And so appealing to tradition or scripture or anything else to say, well, God is X, Y, and Z doesn't help us to get to that. We need to show that God is that first. And I understand there's a problem of doing that since, well, as I submit, God's an object in the mind, and you can only point to it existing in the mind and not anywhere else. The whole point of my argumentation, the syllogism, as well as the problems of the history of the Bible and religions and God concepts in general, is that for everything else we have empirical evidence so far or a repeatable test so far. The only time that it seems we ever need to have a logically coherent argument is when one or two of those things is absent. And it's rare that both are absent. And it seems that the only time that both are absent is when we're talking about abstract objects like numbers or letters or musical notes or God. These things don't have empirical evidence or repeatable tests in the same way that other things do, but they do tend to have logically coherent arguments. At least numbers and letters and musical notes would have that for them. So we can be somewhat sure that they exist in our mind, if nothing else. And for God, yeah, the concept's there, but we can't move beyond that point without just asserting, well, it has to be because reasons. And the reasons given rely on multiple logical fallacies, rely on special pleading, rely on assertions of tautologies that God is this way, God must be this way, this is how God works. And I'm sure a clever person can come up with all sorts of things like that. As far as arguments not being proof, that's within informal logic. So I guess I'll say, unless and until we have, still skeptical of the conclusion. Less than until we have. Yes, I'll just end it like that.
Okay, are you finished there, Deconverted Man?
Yeah.
Okay, so that moves us into the relatively informal cross-examination of one another, where I believe, Deconverted Man, you will be going first, asking Owchywawa a series of questions, as many as you can within a period of 5 minutes, unless Owchywawa wants to go first.
No, that's fine.
Okay. And bear in mind, I will be free to interrupt if I feel that someone is evading the question, or if the question is going nowhere, and I can just simply say for you to move it along. All right, so whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes, Deconverted Man. Go ahead.
Okay. Now when you were explaining how God makes things, you said that he's just kind of like making them exist, so he's not changing anything. So then the whole argument of change just kind of goes out the window when we're talking about how God actualizes things at that point. Then, like, at what point does the argument apply, and then at what point does it stop applying to God?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not that I don't think that God is changing things. I'm just explaining that the way that he is changing things, right? But it's in a different way. It's more that he's causing things to be actual, right? And that's sort of like the foundation for change. So like the way that it would be change is like, so say that right now he's sustaining me in existence, and then tomorrow he's not sustaining me in existence, right? That would be a change, if that makes sense.
Well, it sounds like a lot of equivocation for changing there.
Well, I won't ask a question because it's your turn.
I mean, wouldn't you? I would just say that, you know, it's well, but what is there to change? All that exists is God, right? I mean, before everything else exists, the only thing that's there is God.
Well,
So
I think that's a mistake because God doesn't. There is no before for God because
right, there's
timeless.
no time, right? I'm not
Right.
sure how God can do anything because there's no time to do it in.
Okay, so how does God cause things without changing? So this is so it's not necessarily true that things have to change in order to change other things. Think
Okay,
about
so your argument no longer applies then. The first argument you gave no longer applies then.
why.
Because it's no longer, we don't need change anymore.
I
You
said
can't have it both ways.
I said it's not necessarily true that something has to change another thing. That's the
Okay.
conclusion of my argument. So the reason why I think that is because, so think about a teacher, for example, who's teaching them about the argument for motion, right? Now, when he's teaching the argument for motion, he's imparting this knowledge of the argument for motion to the students, and the students they have it actualized and it's in their mind, right? But think about it. Does the knowledge of the argument for motion change in the teacher? It doesn't. Now, he does have to change in speaking and in vibrations throughout space and time to reach the students, but that's only because he's separated from them by space and time. God isn't separated from things by space and time, so he doesn't have to change things.
Sounds like a lot of equivocation, but okay.
Well, you also have to realize that I'm not equivocating because I use analogous language. I think that the things in the world and God are analogous, but they're not equal. They're not the same. So
right,
when I say
there's
God is,
so then
yeah.
there's a special pleading required for God.
Why? How does that follow?
Well, you know, and it goes back to the whole that how does God know anything at all argument that I gave, in that you just essentially have built a tautology where God just knows everything. It's just all part of God. All this stuff is all things that it knows just because it does.
Well, it's because
Why?
It's because things must pre-exist inside of their cause, in order for them to exist.
But you can't apply that as a universal without having observed the entire universe.
Well, it's based upon the argument I gave for the first premise, which is universally applied because it's based upon or it's not based upon, but it would contradict the principle of identity if it weren't true. If it weren't true that something has to be distinguished from nothing by something else. So it has to be universal.
30 seconds before a question switch.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead then. I the rest of the time, let him. I'm done.
Okay, go ahead, Owchywawa. If you have any questions, you have 5 minutes to ask him whatever questions you wish.
Okay. So how would you answer the question? Like, what is it in virtue of which something is distinguished from nothing?
Well, I don't know that I can answer the question because I'm not sure what nothing means in this context. So could you clarify?
Yeah, nothing is the absence of anything.
I don't know what that is. I've never observed an absence of anything.
So take anything that exists.
Right, but I'm saying that my answer would be that because I've never observed that sort of nothing, I don't even know that that sort of nothing actually exists anywhere. So
well, it doesn't.
Right.
I agree. It doesn't exist.
So then there's only stuff.
It still has to be different from nothing, though. If it were nothing, then it wouldn't exist. So.
Well, but I'm saying the entire concept of nothing is just a concept, that it doesn't. There is no quote nothing, at least as far as I know. Maybe there was or is, who knows? I've never observed it, so I can't reference it in that model.
Sure,
It's like talking about the
Do you
number
agree-
0.
Do you agree that dinosaurs no longer exist, or they probably don't exist anymore?
Well, they exist. They're birds.
Well, okay, not to get into the G-Men stuff, but
Well, I mean, yeah, but they're. I
Okay.
mean,
you know what I mean.
yeah, exists as they were. Yeah,
So-
they exist in a different
when I talk about
way.
so when I talk about something being distinguished from nothing, I'm talking about a specific thing. So, you know, say Triceratops, right?
Right.
Triceratops, what distinguishes a non-existing Triceratops from an existing Triceratops?
That's a very odd way to put it. Well, you either when you have a Triceratops, you have something to talk about, and then you wouldn't have something to talk about, I suppose. You just have an absence of Triceratops to talk about.
Well, I don't
And
think
then
that
I mean, I
answers-
guess you're getting into the metaphysics of like how we talk about objects, and
yeah, I'm trying to figure
that's-
out what is being and what is the foundation for being, and I think that's God. But to ask you a different question, what do you mean by evidence? Like, what do you think evidence is?
empirical observed evidence was my first criteria, which means it can be seen not necessarily just with the naked eye, but with any means that we have at our disposal. So we have heat cameras, we have wave measurements, we have all these different instruments that can allow us
would you
to
agree
see.
that we can't see, for example, we only can see things like black holes indirectly?
Yes, we have a test for that. That comes to my second parameter. So if we don't have observed evidence, we have a repeatable test of some sort that we can perform to know more about the phenomenon in question.
Okay. So with respect to the argument from motion, though, the evidence, the empirical evidence is change. So
and again, change only goes back to a certain point in the T time of universe, and then our deductive reasoning halts because, and I think this is where we might depart ways. I view logic as based on observations of the universe as we've come to understand it, whereas I don't know if you view logic as its own separate thing.
I see it as being deduced from what being is. So being is something that exists, right?
Yeah, so I have very different that the logic as we understand it, the ideas of it, the rules of it are all grounded in how we observe our own universe to be. So if our universe was to change tomorrow and the moon turns out to be green cheese, we have to change logic to accommodate that. So the Michael Jordan fallacy didn't exist until Michael Jordan came along, for example. So until he was there, we didn't have a fallacy to name that.
So you think that before
30 seconds.
You think that before the universe existed, you could have had something that is not what it is?
I have no idea because I at that point we'd have to be able to observe what it was like to talk about it coherently. So there's no way to address what it could or couldn't. We don't know. It's a giant question mark. We have no idea what the rules of logic would be in that sort of universe.
Okay, I think that's all the time.
Yeah.
Yep, that's all the time. Right when Deconverted Man opened a giant can of worms there. So that concludes the debate. Now, both people have agreed that we can open up this channel to anyone watching, whoever wishes to join. You can private message me, and people who are vetted will be able to join the discussion if they so choose. From here on, it's just freeform, shoot the shit kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to try to read the chat and catch up. I hate that they don't save the chat and the Hangout thing. It's so annoying.
There's a way of doing it. I just don't know how.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. All right, bring in the insanity.
So Deconverted Man. So
yeah, what's up?
Do you think that existence is existence before the universe?
what? I don't know if there is a before to the before universe, because
Well, yeah.
you get to the T point and then everything as we understand it breaks down, and then that's science. It's like I can't do what I do, which is informal logic. I can't apply that to that part because there's nothing, I don't understand it. It's like, well, the physics, it's like gravity no longer exists. Well, what would that look like? I have no idea. So without gravity, what would be different about logic? I don't know, because I'm not there to observe it. So I'd have to see what that sort of universe would be like, and maybe the same rules would apply, maybe different rules would. I just have no idea.
It just seems to me like whatever is before the universe, or whatever language we use, it would have to either exist or not exist.
I don't know. I'm comfortable with not knowing for now, and maybe one day we will know, but I think we'll find out through science, not with a logical argument. I think logic has its limits, and its limits, you hit them at some point, and then you have to turn to reality. That's why I brought up the fallacy. It's like lobsters exist or they don't. If they don't exist, my light is off. Well, the argument makes no sense, but in reality, my light's on, so I guess lobsters did exist, and, it all kind of works, but, it doesn't work. You had to check in with reality to see if the light was on or off in the first place, and then you didn't need the argument because the light was on. You didn't need an argument. It's like the sun exists. We don't need an argument for that. The Earth being an obloid spheroid, unfortunately, there's a very small group of people where you need an argument, but those people don't understand a lot of things, so it kind of is a moot point. If there was as much evidence for God as there was like the sun, there would be just a little teeny tiny group of people that disbelieved it, like we have with the flat earthers, and maybe a larger group like we have with anti-evolutionists or whatever. But it wouldn't be what we have with atheists now. It would be a totally different
to be fair,
thing.
Atheists are quite a small minority. That doesn't really prove anything.
They'd be absolutely. It would be an absolutely. I would say it would be very, very smaller group, but minority within this. You're talking 33%. Last I knew of the world was Christianity, and then you've got another 33%. It's another religion, and it's broken up from there. So it's like, well, if the only God is your God, then everything except for your 33% is technically atheist.
But if you think about it, the majority of them believe in the Abrahamic God.
No, it's like about 33% of the world.
Well, you're talking about Christians, right?
Yeah. Okay. If we're gonna add Muslims and Judaism to that, then it would be like, it'd be like 66 or something like that. I'm not sure exactly.
Even Hindus believe in the Brahman, which is basically the same thing as God.
You can't say that is the Abrahamic God, though.
Yeah, that would be a very different. It'd be a different version. But then, again, going back to like my reference of cargo cults, people believe in all sorts of weird things. That doesn't make those beliefs actualized. And I was asked a question in the chat, so I'll answer that if you don't mind, because I noticed it.
Yeah.
Frank Dooley says, "I deconverted man."
I have mods.
What?
Oh,
it's actually me. You.
Oh my word! So many people. Okay, I want to answer Frank's question. Is Deconverted Man a pure empiricist or something? I don't know. Possibly. I don't say that the only thing that can exist is nature, or that the only thing that does exist is nature, or that only the material realm exists. I don't say those things because I can't prove that universally. I can prove it observationally. As far as we have observed, the only things that we have found is nature and material stuff so far. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow we won't find something completely new. We're just, as far as I'm aware, we haven't discovered that yet. So I think that should answer that question. Anyone else ask me a question in chat? Let's see.
if you see a question for me, you can bring that up
Is
too.
inference also appropriate? Wait, what? I don't know. I don't know what that question means. I don't know what they're talking about there. I'm looking for your name as well, but only my name is highlighted. So if you look at the chat, and it will highlight you and not me. Okay, guys. I don't know who you are. Ask me stuff. Come on, bring it on. I don't know a lot of stuff. Ask me stuff I don't know.
I can actually ask Ouchie something.
Oh, see, dang it.
Okay.
Ouchie, do you know that, like, before my real question, do you know what an equivalence class is?
No, I don't.
An equivalence class, it has to do with a certain, so in like, contemporary logic, as opposed to, like, I guess you would employ traditional logic or something like that. Well, I mean, before Aristotelian, but an equivalence class is basically anything which can be described in terms of an equivalence relation. So that's something which is I forget the words, but it's like it has the form A equals A, which is, I think, symmetry. A equals B, that if and only if B equals A, which is like there's three properties, and it's like for anything, it's in its own relation, which just means A equals A. For anything, if it's in relation with another thing, then you can flip it over. So A equals B is equivalent to B equals A, and then for anything which is in a similar relation, so A equals B equals C, well, or if A equals A, or if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, and that's basically any relationship which satisfied those three properties, which you can say of any entity which holds that relationship. It's that, and I'm wondering, like, well, you're talking about being, so, and I know it's probably not very helpful because it sounds very symbolic and vague, but you're treating being as though it's some sort of the way you treat the word being is it's scholastic. So, but like, couldn't one just say that being is the broadest equivalence class? It's just like, of all the abstract terms we have, being, it's the summum genus, if you will, right? Everything has being. Like, I know that's the counter to that. It's the transcendental in the scholastic view, but like, because like the way division works and whatnot, but like, it's just everything has it. But that's all. Like, I don't know why you would go further than that. Like, it's just something which you can say of anything.
Why would I go further than saying that things have being?
No. Like, you go from, like, you try to say that, like, being in some sense is God, right? Like, that's the conclusion of that's the whole scholastic.
Right. So it's why am I not just saying that? Why am I saying that there's actually some fundamental reality here, not just some class, basically? Is what
I don't know if that's, well, like, that's one way of putting the question, yes, but that sounds a bit more nominalist than I was thinking.
So, I mean, it ultimately has to be one reality because of the argument that I gave earlier from John Sullivan, that whatever exists has to have that by which, in virtue of which, it's distinguished from nothing, either in itself or in another, right? So it has to if it has to get it from another, then there has to be another thing that it gets it from, right?
That was the book you lent me. Oh, yeah, right. The book I read. I read most of it. Like, I read like 90% of it. I just stopped because it started to go into Aquinas' stuff. But thank you for that, by the way.
Now, you're not talking, when you said A equals A, you're not referencing the law of identity.
A equals A is just one part of the law of identity. Like, so,
right.
Identity.
Which was challenged. You know that was challenged in a non-classical logic.
Yeah, well, in non-classical logic, you don't actually have to import identity into logic.
Right. I love that because it was so interesting that we could challenge that notion, and it's like, well, if the universe turns out that that's the way it is, then I guess, well, that's the way it is. It's awfully useful though, as kind of a rule of thumb. But
one could then just say, like, well, why is it useful? Like, there's something strange in the fact that logic is useful, and that might indicate that it's connected to reality in some deep.
Well, yeah, it's like it's our observation of this is how things seem to work, and we've cobbled it together the best we know. I guess the man that perceived his wife as a hat, I suppose he'd have a different way of using logic, that would be interesting to study. Like what would that person's universe look like, and how would that work? And
what I want to know,
one could argue that universe just couldn't work, right? Like logic at the end of the day is like the simplest view of logic, and say it's just like a bunch of symbol systems. Like it's a system of symbols. You're just
who
shuffling.
knows? Maybe Wife Star hats and he got it right, and the rest of us are wrong. For all we know. Maybe we're all hats.
Like the counter to that would be like common sense kind of proceeds.
No such thing as common sense. Don't get me on that rant.
So by common sense, I mean like
I know. I'm just messing with it.
Okay. So like you can see like logic in like a A=A type. Well, that's an extension of something more basic, right? More intuitive. And that intuitive thing is measured by it, like is only what it is because like it has practical worth, right? You can look at it through an evolutionary view. It's like our common sense.
It's akin to mathematics, and that if it works, we kept it, and if it didn't work, we would get rid of it. Like the Michael Jordan fallacy I brought up is actually a combination of two prior existing fallacies mashed into one. But we didn't have a name for it before Michael Jordan existed, so it's like, well, did this combo fallacy exist? Yes. We save time by making a whole new name for it that just compounds the two existing fallacies into one because we're lazy.
I missed was this earlier on in the debate? Like I came in really late because
no, I mentioned the Michael Jordan fallacy in passing. It wasn't really part of the debate or anything. It was just kind of one of those odd fallacies I pulled out of the ether, if you will, to reference. The chicken butt. Who's the chicken butt? What the heck?
So Deconverted, man, I'm curious, like, do you think that we get like the principle of identity and the laws of logic from experience? Like, is it like from a scientific method that we get this?
In essence, I would say yes, because however we collectively, because obviously one person's not gonna maybe they'll get it right, but the more people, the better. We observe for example, the law of identity is rather useful. So we said, okay, well, let's make that a law. Let's write that down. A=A. Okay. And so we observe certain things are true about our localized world. And then as we extend our understanding of the earth and biology and the universe and so on, we're going to keep adding to that in a similar way that we would to our scientific ideas. With informal logic, all it really is talking about is natural language being analyzed in a formulaic way. So even though we use different words in different ways, we can try to critically analyze that and think of, okay, what did he mean when he said it this way? What should I think he means? And yes, we should ask for clarification, but you can kind of tease out that sort of thing with it. So I don't know if that answered the question at all, but it is the way we got logic is based on our observation of reality. And there's been a system applied to it. I don't know if the system's as rigorous as the scientific method, which is probably why logic is still like philosophy and not science.
Well, science depends upon the principle of identity, it seems.
Well, it's kind of, there's this kind of gray area where it's like, well, we assume certain things are true, like reality is real, let's just move on. It's just these a priori things that we can't. Yes, we could doubt them, but there's no fruit in doubting them for that long, because it doesn't really get you far. It doesn't get you. It's like, well, maybe everything's in my mind. Okay, well, then just sit in your room and do nothing because it's all in your head. Who cares? That doesn't really get you anywhere. So yeah, there's a lot of assumptions but I think that when we see the results pan out, and so far every valid and sound argument has led to a conclusion that not only follows, but also happens to be something that you can explore, and then you explore it and it turns out to also be true. But I'm not comfortable in saying that always will be the case because of the fallacy. The reverse should be true in hypothetically speaking. I don't know that it is true, but it seems to be that there's always a balance in logic that, you know, if we can have a conclusion that's true but an argument that sucks or that's false, then it would follow that we might have an argument that's true but a conclusion that's not correct, although we've never seen that. So the day we see that is when I start believing in God. You know, that's why I'm still skeptical, because I haven't, and God is just one of many things. It could be souls or spirits or angels or heaven or hell or any other psychic powers or what have you. These things all are in the same category of untestable, unobservable things. And so all that leaves you with is an argument. You know, if I say I can do magic, you want me to, that was a question I was going to ask you, is that maybe you do have an answer for it. I don't know. If God is unchanging and God was willing to be tested regarding the whole Baal test, I think you know what I'm referring to, where they poured the water on the logs and they prayed to Baal and the other prayed to Yahweh, and Yahweh lit up theirs and he didn't, and the other one didn't, nothing happened. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So if God doesn't change, then why can't we perform that same test today?
Okay, so I don't think that it works that way. I mean, I guess it worked that way for what's his name? Whatever the prophet's name was, Isaiah or something, I think. But anyway, I don't think that we can just demand that God, comes in and does that. Actually, I think in the scriptures, I think God told him to do that. I think that so.
It's rather convenient, though, isn't it? That the only time that God can be tested is in a time that we can't test it. In a storybook, essentially, it's like, well, here's a test. We can't do it today, but they totally did it back then. Just believe us.
If you think about it,
it's pretty convenient.
If there were, say, you could do that, that still wouldn't prove that God exists according to my definition.
It would at least be something that I don't have right now, though.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, you could say, well, maybe it's aliens that are messing with us or some super advanced technology.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we've gone down that path. If Q from Star Trek showed up, we wouldn't tell the difference between it and a god. If it wanted to be called God, I don't have any particular attachment to the word, so I don't care. I'd call it God. I don't know that I'd believe it was God, but I'd be like, okay, whatever, you're God, whatever, I don't care. And why would it care if I believed it or not? And if it had the power, it could just make me think it was God anyway. So, what am I at this point? I'm nothing to it.
If God actually does exist, like as a necessary being, he has power over that thing. So you're going to want to.
How do you know?
Well, because God causes that thing to exist. It causes everything to exist.
But if there's no way to tell the difference between from one to the other. That's kind of the problem I have with, say, like the people that interpret Revelation as being literal rather than just a story about King Nero, is you have this fake God come in and pretend to be God, and people are fooled into thinking it's God. And I'm like, if it turns out that it's a different God that actually exists, and you die and you go, and it's like, okay, you were wrong. I'm actually Shiva the Destroyer. And there's going to be like a lot of Christians like, no, this is a test by the actual real God, and then they get thrown into hell because they didn't, accept the actual real God. So it's kind of, it's like this never-ending problem of how, of you have to just pretend that you're right and hope that you're right, and if it turns out you're wrong, and you're the one that becomes stubborn because you can't become skeptical of your own notion of God. Whereas the skeptic like me, I'd be like, okay, you're God, whatever, I don't care. So I'm in a better position. But I'm also not, because I'm screwed because I didn't believe in this particular God, I guess.
Well, maybe for some gods, but just FYI, for under the the Christian tradition, you can be invincibly ignorant. Basically, you can be ignorant to the point to where it's not your fault that you're ignorant of the fact that God exists. Say you didn't hear the arguments, or you didn't understand the arguments, or something like that, or you didn't think that it was satisfactory for you. In that case, you can't be culpable for that. You can't be culpable for, you know, doing something that you didn't choose to do.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a moot point. I wouldn't want to be in heaven anyways. I would want a red button that I could push to just cease existing, because the Trinity would be boring either way. But that's just me. I don't know.
I had a slide for that.
Yeah, you had a slide for that. Yeah, that was. I was pretty impressed. You were ready for what I had. I was like, oh, I thought I was original. Oh, okay, I'm not.
Well, I've been doing this for several years, so. But Frank, do you have a question? Or
yeah, that was a question asked in chat. If people who never hear about hell, shouldn't you guys just keep the whole Jesus thing quiet? I actually know the answer to that, but or a answer to that. But go ahead, Owchywawa.
So, well, God knows the hearts of man, for one. So even if it was the case that we didn't tell people that that you know, that God exists, and you know, we didn't prove it to them, then God could still be able to know that if they had known that God existed, or something along those lines, that they would still reject God. And in fact, they're probably rejecting God in doing things that are sinful, right?
But so that makes the whole exercise kind of pointless, though, doesn't it? Like,
Well, no.
You don't need to tell anyone anything if God's just going to judge them anyways, and He knows what they're going to think anyway. So what's the point?
So the point is that
let's see if my followers do what I told them to do. Basically, I guess the point of the command is to make sure that the followers are following the command. The point of the command is not for the people that aren't going to believe anyways, right?
Well, I mean, I'm doing devil's advocate. Ouchie, do you want to? Because it's your.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know a lot of devil's advocate stuff counter to something like that. But.
You can't devil's advocate. We're talking about God, not the devil. Wrong debate.
But
well, here's a question. Wait, here's a question. SYS 4152 hashtag C64 life. What the bleep?
What?
Don't worry about it. Something somebody said in chat that makes no sense to me.
Okay. But to answer your question, I think that having truth is better than not having truth. So, I mean, in the same way, I would say, well, it's even though you know we're going to go to heaven eventually, like the children starving in Africa, for example, they may be going to heaven eventually, but that doesn't mean there's no point in actually trying to help them here on Earth. In the same way, I think that we should help people come to the truth.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment, not the wording. You know, it's like I don't, you know, that we should try our best to get people to understand things and teach things and be critical of things. Of course, I would encourage people to be skeptical, because then you avoid all the charlatans that are out there. But you know, same thing. It's like whether there's a heaven or hell or whatever. All I know for sure is that this life is here and now, and I definitely want to do whatever I can to make suffering be as little as possible and enhance non-suffering as much as I can. I think that is one thing most people tend to agree on, whether they believe in God or not. It's like there's your hope for humanity for the day.
Did you have anything to say, Pseudo? You haven't spoken.
I have mods.
Oh, okay.
What does that mean?
The Darwin's deity rule.
That means if you act like an asshat, I'm going to kick you out.
Oh, okay. I'm part of the contestants of this game show. You can't kick me out.
That doesn't preclude you from being
my threat still
expelled.
stands.
I'm above the rules.
He pushes the kick button and you're out of there.
There have been prior debates between individuals where when we do an after hang, one of the participants of the debate has been removed from the after hang.
Oh, well, I'm not. I'm innocent. I'm good. I'm sorry. Trevor asked. Hold on. Now I lost it because chat kept going. Trevor Lund asks you, Ouchie, that God is some words I can't possibly hope to pronounce. I'll just put it in chat. But he basically says, you know what? I'll just put his whole text in chat and you can read it because I can't read anymore. There.
Okay. Says Ouchie claims God is. I don't know what that is either. I guess it's like Hebrew or something.
I don't know. Let me ask my brother.
Oh yeah, that must be maybe that's like Arabic. Is this guy like a Muslim?
No.
He's talking about the burning bush.
Yeah. I got where he's saying. So he says in the same text he is speaking a bush.
Oh, it's the burning.
Oh, okay. He says in the same text he's speaking, I guess he means from a bush, a cloud of smoke, walking, etc. So what happened to this? He doesn't do that anymore. So he's basically saying, you know, in these texts we're speaking of God as if he were inside of a bush, and then I'm speaking of God as if he were, you know, immaterial, right? I think that's a fair point. So there's a few. So St. Augustine actually said that God was speaking to Moses through an angel. So that's what he said. I've also heard the comment that some people think that it was actually Jesus in his bodily form there. I don't think that makes any sense because he wasn't born yet, so I don't see that would make sense. But I tend to agree that it's something more like God was speaking through, say, an angel. Yeah, that's what I figured it meant.
It's the I am, or I will be, or I am who I am.
Yeah, that's where the word Yahweh comes from, if I'm not mistaken. So
Word sounds.
So Frank, do you want to bring up your objection to him?
What? I don't remember what it was. Crap.
So you posted in the side chat.
What? Oh no, that was a joke. That wasn't it.
I thought it made sense.
What to the what doesn't get anywhere? One might then ask, why would you want to get anywhere? Where would you be going? How do you know where it's there to go?
All right.
That's just like super skepticism, right? Like he says, like
the man killed himself for a while, but I'm back now.
So it's like the idea is it's a super skeptical response to somebody who's a purely pragmatic who's taking a pragmatic approach, right? Like all the philosophy stuff is you know science is better because whatever, and you can like put all the philosophy stuff on the back burner, and it's like because it doesn't get you anywhere. Like doubting these things doesn't get you anywhere. It's well, how do you know it gets you anywhere? Where would it get you? How do you know that place exists? Like you just like insert skepticism, right? Insert extremophile, like my kind of skepticism, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that keeps me. What would you say? Like staying in my room all day doing nothing, right? That's basically what I do.
I missed all that because I unplugged my microphone so that my brother could try to read that, and then when I plugged it back in, everything died on me, and then I had to do stuff, and now I'm back. So I don't know what I missed. Did I miss anything that was for me?
Alchie just asked me like to express what I wrote in the side chat, which was you had said I don't know if you'd heard, like you said, I don't know how much you missed, but you had said
I don't care.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Somebody asked me questions. I didn't get enough questions.
Deconverted, man. I do want to say, so I do think you can get the principles of identity, for example, from logic, from experience, because I think that what we have ultimately is experience of being. So,
I don't know what you mean by that, but I mean, you get, like I said, I mean, logic is kind of just, it came about by us observing stuff and going like, yeah, that works. That's a good rule. Let's write that down.
You could perhaps like just the very notion of reference, one could argue, like sort of brings with it. So,
I mean, it's just, that's a matter of like, this is how we got logic. It's like, we observed things and then wrote down what worked. I mean, it's not, you know.
That's like how logic, like so formal logic was, you know, well, if you look at Aristotle, he's just like, he's looking at like natural language in a sense, and he's trying to find, you know, forms, and then the rest of formal logic and the three great periods of logical development is like, you know, scholastic.
Right. There's a whole history
to the last 100 years, and all of that's just like, you know, rigorously looking at our basic intuitions and refining them. But for that, you know, informal logic, you know, and then there's a degree to which we're formalizing informal logic now, because we're like looking at, well, these are the things we call fallacy, but why do we consider that? But
yeah, there's a whole debate about whether or not we should even call it informal logic, and I'm like, no, it's mine. I like it. Leave it alone.
It's really just a different kind of formal logic. In my mind.
It really is.
Truly informal logic is just the kind of stuff that the dude argues on the street without really being fully conscious of it. And that's just, well, that's the natural function of language.
Well, Aristotle says that the laws of logic are self-evident.
Yeah, he's wrong about that.
Like I don't know if he's wrong about that. Like Aristotle has a weird view of
Yeah, I don't, because self-evident would be like, well, anybody can figure it out. No, I mean, it you know.
That's not quite what self-evident means to Aristotle. So Aquinas makes this one point in the Summa, and he says things can be self-evident in themselves, but not to others, and in themselves and to others. You know, so the idea is that something being self-evident doesn't necessarily mean that you realize it's self-evident. It doesn't mean that you're cognizant of it. It just means that because like, you know, you can be self-deceived, you can be confused because like you enter into philosophy and get completely effed up in the head because, you know, you get lost in, you know, people can go crazy from doing too much philosophy. So, you know,
yeah, there was a while that I believed in this invisible being that couldn't be proven.
I don't know if that's quite what I meant by crazy, but like
I just had to pour salt in people's wounds. I'm just messing around. I'm just kidding. I'm not.
But like there are people out there who, like, you know, watch.
No, because you get into philosophy. It's like, well, philosophy, I said was like asking whether a cat should be put in a blender, and science is actually doing it.
Basically.
Should we put a cat in the blender? No. Yes. Let's see what happens.
But like philosopher will like go deeper than that. It's like, okay, what is a cat
anyways? Right. If I take off the cat ear and I put it on another cat, and I take off its ear and I put it on this cat, is it the same cat or is it I don't know anymore, man. Put it in the blender. I don't care.
I forget what I was originally.
Yeah.
My line of thought
just. What ship is that? I can never remember his name.
Self-evidence. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, self-evidence. Yeah.
So, like, if you encounter like major skeptical issues, like, you know, the liar's paradox, or something like you know, Descartes' demon or something like that, and like you encounter it without the solutions, or if you see those solutions but you're not satisfied by them, and you are so disposed as to really be like hit by these problems, like that's just like the kind of disposition you have, is that these problems really do affect you in some way, and like other people will just scoff at them and not think about it, but like you're just the type of person who gets drawn in, you can go mad, right? And because of that, like the idea is that because you're basically you could view it as forgetting the self-evident truths because you get focused in on other things, and it's like Aquinas puts it a different, like that's my view of things, but Aquinas puts it a different way because he says it's like if you're learned, like some things which are self-evident, they're not self-evidently self-evident, really. It's they're like only the learned, he says, can do it. So it's like, for example, the example he gives is man is an animal. Right? He would say that's self-evident, right? Most people say, well, that doesn't seem quite true, but it's like it's self-evident because the essence of the essence of the predicate is in the essence of the subject is what he says, and what just this means in like this old scholastic view of grammar.
I really kind of want to work on updating a lot of this stuff to modern language because it's so.
Yeah, I was about to.
It's one of these things. I mean, it's a whole project in and of itself.
It's analytic, right? That would be the modern
analytic language, whatever we want to call modern.
Yeah, I was about to translate it. So he says, like that's like the phrase he uses. He uses the exact example of animal. All men are animals. He said this is a self-evident truth, right? That's an example for him of a self-evident truth, and it seems kind of trivial. Like usually when you hear people talking about the self-evident truths, it's something more like everything has an explanation, right? Like it's more like the principle of sufficient reason, the principle of contradiction. But he takes this sort of arbitrary example: all men are animals, and it's like, and he knows it's self-evident. And again, I'll translate it, but like where he says, the essence, the predicate is in the essence of the subject. And what he means by this is that the word animals and the word men are semantic related in the sense that to speak of men just is to speak of animals. And if you know the meaning of the word man and you know the meaning of the word animal, then you know, at least that's how they use the term back in the you know by virtue of knowing the meanings of the two words that man is an animal. It's just by virtue of the meanings of the words you know it. And to say that the predicate is in the essence of the subject. Again, predicate and subject are just basic grammatical terms. I don't really need to translate that to modern day because it's a modern day term. Predicate, all sentences have a subject and predicate. That's grammar 101.
This used to be about asking whether or not God existed in the mind or like in reality. And now we're talking about my favorite subject. It's great. I love it. Now we're just talking about how logic is and what it is and how it came here. Like people be like, "What is going on in this after hangout?" I don't know.
well, again, so predicate is so.
Frank, do you view logic in some sort of transcendent sense, or is it mundane, like it's just observation?
I'm a universal skeptic. I don't have a view of logic.
Oh, that's cool.
my position can be summed up in this phrase: I am not presently able to defend any knowledge claim to my satisfaction.
But my view. Shouldn't you add "except for that" sentence to the end of that?
No, because I'm not satisfied with that claim either.
Ah, okay, cool.
Yeah, the method of argument you're using is called retorsion, and it's a self-classification issue of various skeptical views, and my view doesn't have it. It's not a problem for me.
See, I like that every sentence that I utter from this moment on is false, except for that. There you go. Like, well, there you go. I screwed everything up.
Yeah. But that is very interesting. The thing you should search up if you say like going. I mean, I know you're interested in this stuff. I'm not a subscriber. Maybe I still am. Like every once in a while, I'll go through all my subscriptions.
Yeah, everyone should subscribe to Deconverted Man, and I don't know if Owchywawa has a channel.
Yeah, I do.
Owchywawa has a channel, so I would put those links in the outside chat, but I can't. So just look for us and find us. I know I'm easy to find, Deconverted Man. Just type that in, and I'm like the first thing that pops up.
Yeah, my name's
type in Owchywawa. I don't even know how to spell it.
Owchywawa is how you pronounce it.
Owchywawa. It's spelled.
It's like going to Wawa and getting hurt.
Yeah, I don't know how to spell it, and you probably like just instead look for like I don't know, blue pancakes or something, blue waffles probably. I don't know, something blue. Nothing bad will happen. Make sure safe search isn't on.
It's 2017. We're still making that joke.
Yeah. Hey, the world was supposed to end today and yesterday as well. The videos couldn't decide if it was yesterday or today, but either way, it didn't end, and I'm kind of disappointed. No planet showed up behind the sun. Oh well. Maybe it's an invisible planet.
Still trying to explain self-evidence. my train of thought has been destroyed by
I
you.
don't care anymore,
I blame
man.
you.
No, but you'll email me and we'll talk about logic sometime. I'm trying to keep it on topic of the supernatural and stuff.
Related. Like,
I know it's all tangentially related. Somebody was going to ask me a question in chat. They said they were preparing a question, and I haven't received it yet. I'm like ready. I'm like on the seat of my edge. Man, I wish I could words say of the Yoda has made. Speaking of, well, that would be fun. I should give a logical argument as if Yoda was telling it. Syllogism. I can't Yoda speak though. All right. Anyone in chat have any questions? Are traps gay? Maybe. It depends.
I would say yes.
Sometimes, but not always, because trap might be a guy that looks like a girl, or a girl that looks like a guy, or a girl that girl is. You sent one. Where?
So, did General have any comments?
What year was blue paint invented?
Well, I can say that blue paint is sustained in existence at every moment by God. So it's created at every moment. Right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Does God exist everywhere?
In the sense that he doesn't literally, not literally, except in the sense that he's present to everything in that he causes it to exist. In that sense, yes, but he doesn't exist like in space or anything.
Okay, because I've heard that evil is an absence of God or an absence of good, but if God's everywhere, then evil couldn't be that. So,
right, yeah, because so I hold the privation view of evil. So I think that evil is something that doesn't exist.
But it says in the Bible, God created evil.
Oh, yeah, indirectly. So if you think about it, if you believe that evil doesn't exist, and ultimately what I think is that anything that has being insofar as it has being is good, right? So it follows necessarily then, because the only thing that can cause things is that which exists, follows that good has to be the cause of evil.
Do you have sort of a universalistic approach to salvation, or is it?
He's taking the privation view of evil, right? Evil doesn't exist.
Yeah. Okay.
What is it called? Privatio boni, right? It's
yeah.
Evil is just a distorted, either the absence of good or a distortion of the good.
Z Moore 42 asks, where according to the Bible does the conscience come from?
I think actually it says it comes from the heart, right? Because I think that, like, obviously I don't accept this, but I think that they believed back then that the brain was in the heart.
Guys, Steve says at the side chat that if 5 minutes before hangout, you got to snipe him. So
you got to what? Oh, I snipe me out of the hangouts. Oh, okay.
5 minutes before you're ready to go off air. That way it will stop. So
all right. Woo! Why is God afraid of humans having knowledge? Well, that's a loaded question. You're assuming that God is afraid of humans having knowledge. So Steve Bramman asked a loaded question. Why is God afraid of humans having knowledge?
I think I know.
Let me rephrase that. Is God afraid of humans having knowledge? I think is a better way to put that.
I think I know what he's talking about. He's probably talking about, Adam and Eve, where he said not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right?
Right.
So the way that I see that verse is that, this reminds me, you brought up something about how Adam couldn't exist if evolution were true. So maybe I'll address that too in answering this. So the way that I see this story is before people had the knowledge of good and evil, right? They weren't able to commit evil. So all that this story is, I don't take it literally. I just think that the story is just saying that at some point we gained consciousness, right? We gained the ability to determine between good and evil, and once we gain that ability, once we gained the ability to freely choose, we gained the ability to do good and evil. And so I don't think that Adam and Eve literally ate of a tree of knowledge of good and evil. But to go back to like the Adam and Eve thing, so ultimately, if there was a first man to sin, right? Sorry, there would have to be a first man to sin, because I mean, there just had to be a first man to sin. There had to be somebody who was first. I don't know how else to describe this, because if there was, it's not like otherwise everybody would have to sin at the same time. Doesn't really make much sense. It makes more sense that at some point man gained consciousness
Or
of
nobody
what evil is. Well, we know that somebody sinned.
I know. Like, it just,
Why I kind of go go into the why actualize a universe where sin exists in the first place?
So
is a world with love is better than a world with. Sorry,
well,
I know very sorry.
I don't think that God necessarily has to create the best of possible worlds. So he didn't necessarily have to make this world with sin. But what he does have to do is he has to will whatever he creates, he has to create it with the end. What the purpose that he has to create it for is for himself, is with the end inside of himself. And the reason for that is because God is the first cause, and the purpose of something, or the purpose for an action, is a cause of your willing for it. So if something else, if the purpose of man existing was for himself in and of himself and nothing else, then that would be a cause of God, and that wouldn't make sense if God's the first cause. So yeah.
Okay, I put a thing in the side there for you. You're getting all the questions, so I'm just reposting them. I don't know what I'm doing.
Ask Ouchie, how does he know that God is good and the devil is evil? Okay. Okay. I actually have a slide on this. Maybe I'll just bring it up, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah. Is this going to go into DCT?
I don't know what that means.
Divine Command Theory?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No,
somebody in chat asked if God does something, is it what is it? It's like, well, anything, DCT is, anything God does is automatically good, just because God did it. Like it can't do something that's bad, even if it seems bad to us. It's not bad because God did it. That's DCT, which is like, well, there goes ethics.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to divine command theory so much.
Yay!
I'm a natural.
You get plus 1 point for that.
So whether God is omnibenevolent. So yeah, hold on. Okay, so if we look at like what Jesus said about God, he said, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except for God alone." And the reason for this, traditionally, how it's been interpreted, is that God is what it is to be good in itself. Okay, so how do we know that? So Aristotle said that good is what all desire, right? So good is ultimately what we all desire. And it's actually what everything in the universe desires. But let's just, for simplicity, think about man, and man insofar as he is an intellect, right? Because that's what distinguishes man from everything else, that he has an intellect. So what is it that ultimately we desire as intellectual creatures? So St. Thomas Aquinas says the object of the intellect is what a thing is. Okay, so the issue is, so ultimately what we do is we look at a thing like building, and we say, what is it? But so I could say, okay, it's a building, but we're not going to be satisfied with that. At least not with things that we're interested in. We're going to want to keep asking questions, and asking what is it made of? Like, it's made of bricks, and what is that made of, and so on and so forth. And this is ultimately the spur that we get for science, this desire to know things. And ultimately, if I'm right, the very end of the series, we're never going to be satisfied until we know God, because God is the first cause at the end of the series. So I say that God is the ultimate object of our intellectual desires. And so God is good because he satisfies our desires and makes us happy if we know God. All right, so is God omnibenevolent? So the end of any choice, I kind of already went over this, but the end of any choice of the will is the cause of the willing. The first cause cannot be caused by anything outside of himself. So the end of God willing must be himself. So in creating man, God must create man with the end being in himself, which is the ultimate good for man, as we saw. In other words, God must will the good for man as his end, which means God is omnibenevolent. So that's basically it.
All right. Well, that was words. No, yeah, a lot of people are saying word salad. That's a lot of.
Can you bring up the last slide, Ouchie? For the slide before,
Oh yeah, sure.
Appreciate Deconverted, man.
I mean, I can I don't know if I'll succeed, but I can try to translate the Scholastic into a bit more modern stuff.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, make the theology comprehensible for the people in chat. I mean, I understand some of it, but when I deconverted, I stopped caring about theology. So now it's like, yeah, whatever. I guess I remember these words. I don't care anymore. Not to insult it or anything. It's just, it's not my thing. I mean, I like it, but it's kind of I don't like it at the same time. I have a love-hate relationship with it. I'm going to stop talking now.
Wait, is this the slide with the? Can you go back one?
Sorry, I unmuted myself so I could talk. Okay, so what? Let's see here.
God is what. Is it so? So when Aristotle says good is what all desire, he's literally defining good as that which is desired, right? Like to speak of a good for Aristotle, literally is just to speak of the thing you desire. So think of the terms when we say you went to get the goods from the store or something like that. It's sort of like that usage of the word good, right? It's good in the sense of that what you want. It's the thing wanted, right? It's a weird view of. It comes from a weird view of grammar.
Yeah, it's what we tend towards by nature.
See, again, that's just language no one's going to understand.
It's what we according to what we are, we act in a certain way, right? So if you think about potassium chlorate, for example, if you put it with, if you heat it up and add sugar to it, it's going to result in an exothermic reaction, right? That's because that is what it is. It's the kind of thing that does that. It results in an exothermic reaction. It's
called a disposition or a tendency or some such. There's certain things by virtue of what they are. That is to say, and again, it's hard to find better language than what the scholastics use, but
right. And according to what man is, as an intellectual being, he seeks knowledge because that's what an intellect is, basically, right?
Yeah. So in the same way that so he's using, I guess you're using desire in a broader sense than Aquinas would have used it.
No, actually.
I mean, is an appetite identical to a desire for Aquinas, or is it different?
Yeah.
Is desire broader?
In a way, yeah. But I think you're trying to tie this to the will, right? Because I saw what you wrote in the side.
Oh, that's what. Okay, so I'm thinking of.
Yeah, because the end of the will is the good. That's what the will ultimately goes for, and in that sense, it would be that's a sort of one of the senses of a desire. But you can actually apply desire in Aquinas' sense to every single thing, including like potassium chloride.
Or anything which has so anything which so in this sense, the good would be the thing tended towards in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Okay, so I'll try to translate that for people. So the way the scholastics, I won't say Aristotle specifically, but the way Owchy is using the term good then is again, you have this notion of tendency, and it's start with like a normal goal, right? If you have an intellectual goal, you're thinking about things like I want ice cream, right? The term good then is just in this instance, ice cream would be the good, and it's the object of your want, right? The word good then just means the object of your want in this restricted sense. Now, in a broader sense, you could say, by virtue of having mass, right? Anything which has mass tends towards other things which have mass in accordance with the universe square law, right? So,
yeah, I think that you guys, we need to make a whole separate hangout, because Steve has to probably go to bed, and other people in chat are deteriorating into madness. So I think it's a good time to wrap up our little shenanigans here.
All right.
okay. Sorry, Owchy.
Yeah, no. If you want to make another thing, go for it, and post it somewhere. Somebody will see it.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Can a mod post a new hangout or something somewhere? If they do that, I don't know. Well, anyways, I'm done. Thanks everybody for your time and energy and questions. Hopefully I was adequate. And if either of us had any logical fallacies, then you should be skeptical of our conclusions. And thanks to my opponent for his time and energy. And that's all I got to say. Lobsters exist.
Drop some out.
Did you
That
knock
should
him
do.
out?
There he goes.
Yeah, there, you knock him out.
Yeah,
Okay,
now we'll go
and
offline
we're going
shortly.
to die any moment now. Goodbye, everybody. Not
night.
die for real, die in a different way.
The hangout is over. Go to bed, people.
Good night. Good night, everybody. Good night. How do we turn it off? Does it just end?
It'll just go down by
All right.
itself.
I'm going with the shit,
All right.
man. I'm gonna
All
go
right.
say
Good night.
things that
Bye-bye.
don't die. Goodbye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
All right.
Good night.
Yep.
Still
Still
up.
here. Oh, Blade, what do we do? I can't end it. I don't know how do I feel like that guy in .hack where he
You gotta leave the hangout. There.
No, I don't want to leave the hangout. I want it to die.
It won't
around
end
me.
unless you leave the hangout.
Oh,
Actually, Steve said it would end in like 5 minutes after you dropped him out, right?
Yeah.
So we have 5 minutes.
okay. Well,
So Frank, you want to continue?
explain the universe and nature of reality in 5 minutes.
What I'm doing is like the terminology of the scholastics. It's not like it's not word salad. It's just that it's like in a system, right? It's like trying to tell somebody like a lot of quantum mechanics is math, so it's difficult in a different way. But a lot of it is just terminology, right? And so you might listen to somebody speaking about quantum mechanics and you can't understand them because of the math, and that's not what I'm saying. It's scholastics. But another time you might hear somebody talking about stuff and you can't understand them because they're using words in a way differently than they're normally used because they have this theoretical systematic of whatever. And so the scholastics have this whole way of talking, which is in the end of the day, which is kind of it makes sense when you learn it. But it's also fundamentally different than the way people normally use those words. So it feels like word salad, but that's only because the scholastics have like connected everything in a weird kind of way. And it's not even scholastic. It's just like this is just the way people talked about like the way people use these words 1,000 years ago, a little less than that. That's just how all of philosophy went. There was this particular way of looking at things, which has disappeared, I guess, to some degree, and it's also philosophical language as well. It's again, so it seems like word salad only in the way that like people using like anything would look like word salad to somebody who it's like a 5-year-old child listening to walking into a lecture on advanced physics. It's like, and again, this comparison suggests that there's something useful to it. And there's a problem with the comparison because by virtue of it being philosophy, everyone's going to doubt stuff. But it's comparable to the 5-year-old child walking into a physics lecture, not understanding what's going on, not because the comparison not being because the physics is true, but
Or
because the language being used is,
or
different.
human walking into an evolution.
Again, like that suggests. I'm not trying to like use the analogy to like to belittle the people who I'm putting.
I know, but yeah, no, it'd be like a lot of people wouldn't understand what possible worlds mean either, right?
Yeah, it's like that. It's a term of art. But the problem with scholasticism is that their terms of art are normal words in the English language. So that you're literally using a completely normal word in a completely different way, and it makes it like it needs to be translated. It needs to be unfurled and explained to the average dude, because otherwise it really will sound like word salad, and they'll be completely just thinking that, because again, you're using a normal word in an abnormal way.
Unfortunately, that's hard to do in 8 minutes, but
yeah, it's impossible to do in 8 minutes. You're basically unfurling an entire. You're not really unfurling a singular system of philosophy, because like the way I do it, I don't want to like, oh, this is the ultimate system. No, I disagree with that. It's unfurling philosophical language in general, and you know,
I don't expect everybody to understand everything that I said, because you have to be in the scholastic tradition to understand it. But what I do hope is that it'll encourage people to go and look further. And that may or may not happen, but I think that seeing that I don't think that, like, this is my opinion, but I don't think my opponent was able to attack my position. So I think that if you want to,
because you didn't articulate it because it's scholastic language.
But if you want to defeat my position in the same way, you might want to defeat, say, Fodor's argument, right? You need to go out and learn it. And
oh yeah, that's probably
it is.
Good example. Yeah, like Ozzy's spending a lot of, like, I haven't watched a lot of, I've been following the Fodor thing that much, but I think the idea is that like nobody's really understanding the language that's being